Waters, a New York-based criminal defense attorney and former Bronx prosecutor. He's going to help us parse through the latest developments. Also outside the courthouse in California is our good friend Ben Pesta, who's a veteran criminal defense attorney based and a former journalist, too, we should say as well, who's written for such publications as Rolling Stone and Crawdaddy, which is great because, Ben, you can give us the perspective from the music industry and also the perspective from the legal industry. Let me always start, as I do with Beth Karras, to give us the panel. If you're Phil Spector's defense attorney and this new development has just sort of fallen in your lap, that Dateline has run its piece last night, and the judge had admonished the jury not to watch it, would you make hay of it at all? Would you ask the judge, bring the panelists back in today and voir dire them one at a time so that they can be on the record as promising they did not watch it?
I'm not sure that you could make any hay out of it, Ashley, unless you had some sort of evidence that one or more jurors had been contaminated. Unless you heard something, someone had said something to you, you'd overheard a juror at the break. Other than that, the jurors were admonished by the judge, and they're presumed to have followed his admonition.
Let me ask Kyle Waters.
So, you saw how the judge handled this, despite the fact the prosecution said that the defense went too far here, and they wanted to deal with it in some fashion because of these other instances that the prosecution said they wanted to introduce, and the judge said no to them. The prosecution said, well, you know what, she's opened up the door, we should be able to do it this way. Judge finally said, no, I don't think so. That's not going to happen. Ben Pesta, I remember listening to that portion of the defense closing argument and kind of wincing a little bit, saying, you know what, that's sort of skating close to the edge right there. And maybe, just maybe, making the judge sort of reconsider. Are you surprised listening to the arguments here that basically finally the judge said, I just don't think it went that far over that I have to do anything to help you here?
I'm not surprised, Jack, and what occurs to me is that it's a particularly ineffective kind of argument. Kenny Biden's saying, in effect, look, he's been dating women all of his life, and he only pulled guns on 5 of them. That's like being caught out sneaking around with other women by your wife 5 times and saying, look, honey, look at all the affairs I didn't have. Don't I get credit for that?
That's you know what, that's a great point. Kyle, if you're the prosecutor, that's a pretty good argument you can make out of that, yes?
I agree 100%. I thought it was a terrible argument to begin with. They say only 5 times did he pull a gun. This is a violent case. This is a case where it's alleged he pulled a gun on a woman. Most people in their lives never pull a gun on anyone, woman or man. And she's saying, well, it's only 5 times that he's pulled it. I think it's a shocking argument to make in the first place. And I agree with the judge that those other instances didn't really relate to this type of activity. That's why they weren't allowed in.
I guess the difficulty here, and Ben, you first on this, the difficulty here is once this testimony comes in, I know this is the argument that I made as a defense attorney, I've heard other defense attorneys make, I've made the opposite argument as a prosecutor, but once that type of testimony comes in, the defense will often say, well, how can I defend against it? What can I do here? I can't run 5 separate mini trials within the confines of this trial. And the fact is, if it really happened, what else can the defense do other than say, well, yeah, maybe he did pull guns, but he certainly didn't pull the trigger on any of them. It really makes it difficult for the defense, does it not, Ben?
That's about the size of it, and it's an extremely tough call for the defense to make. That's what you have to do. He didn't pull the trigger those times. The problem is that, of course, the instruction for murder is that he doesn't have to have intended to pull the trigger. All he has to have done is engage in conduct that was inherently dangerous to human life, with knowledge that it was dangerous to human life, and go ahead and engage in the conduct anyway.
Kyle, if you were
At the beginning of what ended up being a string of more than about 70 witnesses. And yet, with all of that testimony over the last 4.5 months, we have not heard this jury ask for a readback. Does this say anything good or bad for Phil Spector?
So far, it's neutral, Ashley, and don't forget, we're only on day 4 of deliberation. The jury may ask for 10 or 12 readbacks before they're through. They may simply be organizing the evidence in their own minds and making charts right now. I'd be very surprised if they didn't wind up asking for at least one readback before the end of the deliberations.
Oh, heavens to Murgatroyd. Are you kidding me? I would be more than surprised. I would be shocked, just as I was shocked today to start hearing the first inclinations, or at least mentions, of the word hung jury, because I kind of feel the same way you do, that it's only day 4. They got a lot to work with. So, Kyle Waters, what do you think? Yes, we're 4 days into it, but shouldn't this be about
the people in the courtroom, the staff in the courtroom, are very, very careful once a jury starts deliberating about making sure they follow all of those directions and directives. Beth, I'm sure one of the things that they are wrestling with inside of that jury room is the army of experts that came in to testify for both sides in this case. And that gets us to our courtside docket for today. We want to revisit something that took place, and that is whether or not you're talking about a checkbook defense. That allegation, you'll remember, was made by the prosecution during the course of their closing statements. Beth Karras is with us to talk about that. Also, quick reintroduction of our friends spending some time with us. Kyle Waters here in our studios in New York-based criminal defense attorney, former Bronx prosecutor. Outside the California courthouse, a man who's become one of our good friends here, Ben Pesta, veteran criminal defense attorney out there in Los Angeles. So let's talk about this whole notion of shopping for experts and listen to some of the testimony here. One of the defense experts being asked about just how much he's being paid for his role in this trial. So, Ben, in terms of these arguments here, isn't it really fair to say that experts on both sides have some self-interest? The notion certainly, and it was argued by the prosecution, if you're a defense expert, if you're not going to make yourself available and make arguments, you're not going to get much work out there. But the flip side of that, can't you argue that if you're a prosecution expert, you're part of the prosecution team, you're paid by the government, whatever government that is, and if you're not cooperating with prosecutors, maybe you won't have your job for that long. What do you think?
That's absolutely true. And one of the powerful counter-arguments is who pays the forensic criminologists? Los Angeles County. Who pays the coroner? Los Angeles County. Who pays the deputy sheriffs? Los Angeles County. Who pays the prosecutor, Alan Jackson? Los Angeles County. All of these people draw the same county paycheck every couple of weeks.
So, Kyle, again,
were these shoes in anticipation of her job at the House of Blues?
Yes, this is what they were for.
What time was the last time you saw Lana? When did you part company with Lana?
Well, the receipt time here is 17:13. That would be 5:13. And I stayed there, and she left because she had to go to the House of Blues. She had to be there by 6. She called me and told me that...
Excuse me, I'm that's not responsive.
It's not directly responsive, sustained.
Did Lana explain... I'm sorry, I didn't mean to...
No, go ahead.
Did Lana explain why she needed to leave your shopping excursion?
Yes, she had to be at work.
Was that the last time you ever saw her?
Yes, it was.
So Lana bought 7 pairs of shoes the day before. If the defense is right, she committed suicide. 7 pairs of shoes. Ben Pesta, I know you're not a woman, and I know you probably don't feel our pain with regard to shoes, but you also don't feel our joy with regard to shoes, 7 new pairs of shoes. There are 9 men on that jury. There are 3 women on that jury, but a quick poll just around this studio, Jack and Dan, who's working the cameras, they winced when I told the story about what happened to my sister-in-law Karen's shoes. They winced, and they said, your brother will never live this down. Doesn't everybody know the importance of shoes to women, and won't that little moment on the stand be huge?
It's absolutely unquestionable that story is going to resonate more with the female jurors than with the men. I'm married to a woman. She has many pairs of shoes. I know that women consider shoes to be fun, whereas with guys, shoes are something that we wear because establishments that sell beer won't let us in without them.
It's a very good point, Kyle. What do you think about this? I love that Ben said that it's going to resonate more with the women than it will with the men. But like I said, both Jack and Dan in this studio, and I'm guessing you too, and Ben out there in the field, probably knew right away when I said that my brother threw out 8 pairs of my sister-in-law's shoes. That was horrible. It was a horrible infraction. Even the men, even the 9 men on that jury, don't you think they know how important the shoes would be?
You see, Ashley, I look at this whole story differently.
Really?
I think it's comment on how sometimes a wife might overreact to something that a male does that's completely normal. Nothing to do with
Cut
shoes.
his mic. Cut his mic. You will never be invited back. Oh, come on. Work with me on this one.
My wife is still mad at me about a little thing with the wedding cake at the wedding where a little got beyond her mouth, and I haven't lived it down yet, years ago. So, I think the shoes probably are important, other than the fact that, as a defense attorney, I'd argue, I'm sure this wasn't an extremely premeditated suicide by this woman, but it was something that was building up over time, and she was still going on with her life normally.
Okay, good point.
But it culminated in the events that occurred in the foyer or near the couch or on the couch of the
I get you. You're saying
Phil Spector
she may have
house.
had her ups and downs, and the day before was a real up, and she was thrilled about the shoes and the job, and the minute it all sort of came to a head was when the gun, was in her hand. I'm having trouble with it, I have to say. How about just the fact that we had her mother on the stand and looking so vulnerable and so upset? I mean, regardless of the story about the shoes, there was Mom bringing Lana's family to life. And why don't I start with you real quickly, Kyle, weigh in on that.
Family members of the deceased, whenever I'm on a murder trial, I try to get them off the stand as quickly as possible.
I can imagine.
They're devastating to, they pluck the heartstrings of the jurors. Everybody feels bad. Everybody feels emotion. But hopefully the jurors will separate the sympathy from their weighing of the evidence.
Ben, do they actually, are they able to? I mean, look, it's a little like asking us to be robotic. Everybody brings humanity to the job he or she does, including us on television. It's impossible to separate yourself from who you are.
Well, I think
That's true.
I'm sorry.
That's true, and I agree with Kyle 100% on this. You've got to get the grieving mother off the stand as quickly as possible. You can't cross-examine her very vigorously. You can't be anything but nice and overweeningly sympathetic toward her. You just have to get her gone.
All right, guys, hold that thought for a minute, because we want to do that courtside quiz, which is what we always do around this time. On the night of Lana Clarkson's death, Phil Spector went to a few different restaurants and establishments and ordered a few different alcoholic drinks. So today's courtside quiz, we're asking this.
It has to do with Phil Spector. In the courtroom, the jurors, as Beth just told us now, got to hear some of these comments, clearly not very positive for the defense here, the comments that he makes to these women. And they got to watch Phil Spector sit throughout the course of the trial. I'm going to ask you both. Ben, I'll ask you first. And I think, Ben, you and I might have even gone over this question once before. I'm going to offer a theory for you here, all right? At this juncture, the jurors had heard everything bad about Phil Spector they could possibly have heard. 5 women come in and tell the stories. They hear him on the phone messages he leaves to people. If I'm a juror and Phil Spector is charged with murder and the defense is, it wasn't me, it was an accident, I want to hear him say that. And a part of me truly believes that he should have testified in this case. What do you think?
The jury always wants to hear the defendant explain himself. And although the judge will admonish them that they are to draw no inferences of any sort from his not having done so, of course it's going to be in back of their minds. One of the main reasons that he didn't take the stand here was, what kind of explanation can you give for waving a gun in people's face?
And to away from Phil Spector's comments after the police came to his house to make sure that none of that came in and put pressure on them to put Phil Spector on the stand. In any event, that's going to do it right now for us, for our coverage here, what's going on. Of course, we're keeping an eye on that jury clock. If something happens, we'll come back to it. But in the meantime, our thanks to our friend Beth Karras, as always, for guiding us through all of this. Beth will be checking in with you, I'm sure, as we continue our coverage. And also to Ben Pesta, Kyle Waters. Guys, always a pleasure. And you certainly help us out a lot with your perspectives that you bring. We'll look forward to having you both on again sometime real soon.